Thanks a lot.
Probably not.
Okay. Wait.
You go to the military?
Yes.
Just don't pull out like, what's your opinion on this? No.
Perfect. None of that. Okay.
Last time I did a good job of global sales.
That's right.
You know, kind of a big deal. Watch.
I would expect so.
I wrote the first. It's like pretty sure. No. I like it. My last thing I wrote was
Because you can't just, it's like, you can't actually
and then this one, I don't really understand this, so I just wrote,
Yeah,
I was doing good to make sense of it. I forgot how to last week, I was like, I don't yeah, I was not.
Yeah, maybe you should. Yeah, as the ideal honors student. Unless there's more talent.
I know, I'm
I feel like I mostly understood the other two. But Todd's but I'm excited for it because it's something I need to have some understanding of this.
but I have my first game, so I need to like run it by him because that was really yeah. So yeah.
Dude, just teach me. Yeah.
I'm not understanding any of the words separately. So when they're all together, it's still not gonna be yes. What is your
There were a ton of
This works. That's really good. Head's so good.
I'm sorry?
You guys doing okay? Well, good evening. Good to see everybody out tonight. End of January, right? Our pre-lectures week. Is that what it is? That's why everybody looks so tired. We have tonight the first of our 4 scheduled meetings, 4 scheduled honors evenings. These are interdisciplinary seminars that feature our honor students. We'll do this 4 times this semester. Tonight we have Jenna Kirchville, who's a nursing student, nursing major, junior, right, nursing program. Todd Houchel, Todd's finance, right, finance major, a junior from Texas. And Jordan Griggs, a sophomore in biblical education, and she is from the great state of Arkansas. We'll have time for questions and answers afterwards, but we're going to get started right now. And Jenna, why don't you come on up and describe to us what you have tonight.
Alright, hello. So today I'm going to be talking about the digital age and healthcare coming together. So our age is becoming increasingly more digital and online, and the workforce is expanding each day with remote work. We're seeing more and more people go remote to work from the comfort of their own homes, but the nursing profession has always been seen as something that will never go digital. But this idea may not be too far out of reach. No one likes to go to the doctor, so why not do it from the comfort of your couch? So tonight we'll be analyzing the benefits and possible complications of a digital age of nursing. So first we're going to talk about nurses' burnout, which is increasing each day, leading to a nursing shortage. In 2021, 63% of nurses reported burnout, with the turnover rate being 24.9% in the U.S. With the nursing profession becoming understaffed and overworked, nurses feel like they're not able to provide the best quality of care. Nurses come into work exhausted with more patients than they can manage, while trying to pick up extra shifts to help out in their hospital. In 2021, 44% of nurses reported that they worried about their patients not receiving the highest quality of care due to burnout. With quality of care being compromised, new solutions must be explored. Additionally, the burnout and overworking of nurses is causing an increase in anxiety, depression, and stress in the nurses, which is hindering the quality of care that they can give. So this calls for something to change, which may include the increased implementation of telehealth. All roads seem to lead back to the pandemic that changed our lives, and the COVID-19 pandemic began in 2020 and is still a source of stress today. With more people being sick and needing care due to a brand new virus taking over the world, nurses' workload increased by 62% in 2020, leading to many nurses quitting. However, this is not the only reason for the surge in nurses leaving the profession. Many nurses were also contracting the virus and bringing it home to their family and friends, which sparked the idea of digital nursing. Rather than a nurse being exposed to a deadly and harmful disease each day, they could do the work through the safety of their screen on a computer. During COVID, many online programs were implemented because people were not leaving to go to the doctor but still needed care and prescriptions. Many people ended up enjoying this online healthcare, causing it to be more normalized in the years following the pandemic. Currently, we can see this in nursing moving to the virtual age. There's virtual therapy for behavioral health science, teledermatology, virtual clinical style trials, and many more. There's apps on cell phones which healthcare providers can call you via video chat to talk about the symptoms that you're having and provide prescriptions. It is convenient for the patient and it's faster for the provider, but are there mistakes being made that the barrier of the screen is causing? So first we'll look at the benefits of transitioning to virtual healthcare world and then the cons of that. So telehealth programs allow nurses to have daily or weekly check-ins with their chronic patients. Rather than seeing a patient every few months, they can check in more times due to the decrease in time required. Nurses are better able to have a consistent monitoring, and then if an issue arises, the patient can come in for further evaluation. Telehealth is also decreasing the amount of emergency department admissions, since patients can call a doctor for guidance of whether they need to go to the emergency room or not. This helps not overwhelm the emergency department so that then they can better manage and treat those in life or death situations. Additionally, nurses can provide better education that is repeated more often to the patient. Rather than the patient hearing it every few months when they come into the doctor, they can be hearing this much more often to improve their disease and could get daily or weekly reminders from a nurse. And education is vital to the nursing scope of practice, and this could help the education being better implemented outside of the hospital. Nurses also have a lot less risk of getting sick and spreading illnesses to other patients when there's a screen protecting them from the disease. Additionally, less registered nurses will be needed on the floor at a time. Rather than needing 8 nurses on a floor, there could be 6 because of less patients. Further, the triage method, which I'll talk about later, could be in place where nurses on the floor are doing the physical jobs while another nurse is providing a virtual education care to the patient. This cuts down on the physical nurse time spent at the bedside, since there's a nurse to answer the client's questions. This way, the physical nurse can be present for the more pressing needs of the patient. But with all of those benefits, there's also the downsides. First, the older population makes up the most of the people needing health care, and many older adults don't know how to use technology very well, so this could hinder them from the services that they need to receive. Further, there's concerns over privacy and confidentiality online, and there's evil people in the world and hackers that could easily get into video chat meetings or online files, since it would mainly be on a computer. Confidentiality also goes with this. It's harder to manage and control who can hear the patient talking on a phone call. A nurse could have that on speaker or something and be talking about a health issue, and other people overhear since it's online, which breaches the confidentiality that nurses are required to adhere to in the profession. And it's harder to manage who's hearing what. Now, a possible solution is the teletriage method to overcome some of the complications that clients worry about. So the teletriage is a 3-person care plan model. There's a bedside RN, a virtual RN, and an RN partner. So the bedside RN is doing direct care with the patient at the bedside. The virtual RN is educating the patient and answering the client's questions, and can alert the bedside RN if there's an urgent complication that might go unnoticed for longer prior to this model. And then there's an RN partner, which is a medical assistant CNA or LPN. And they're doing the activities of daily living and tasks such as hygiene, bed linen changes, and baths. The teletriage is an interesting approach because it allows the bedside RN to be able to take care of more patients, and the virtual RN can handle the education and creating meaningful conversations with the client. The virtual RN has time to cultivate a relationship with the patient that can help with depressive symptoms that patients feel in the hospital. The virtual RN position also allows for registered nurses to stay in the profession for longer since it's a less physically demanding job. So it's great for those who are on their way to retirement to minimize the physical labor of nursing. This teletriage would require 20% less registered nurses, which would help with the shortage and burnout too. It's important to tie all of these ideas back to our Creator because He's the one who controls the path of the healthcare field, and we can trust in Him that in the illnesses and difficulties that we face, but also pray for Him and strength for those in the nursing profession. We can ask Him for guidance regarding the topic of virtual healthcare and that His will is done in all of it. A large aspect of why I wanted to go into nursing was to be able to shine light on those going through some of the most difficult times in their life. So we can all pray that in the movement toward a digital world that His will is done and we can still shine our lights in this world. And as our world becomes increasingly reliant on technology, this may bring about a lot of changes, and there's definitely pros and cons to the idea of teletriage and virtual nursing as a whole. But this could be a possible solution to the ongoing nursing shortage.
Well, Jenna, is there a line, before we start questions, is there a line that healthcare professionals will have to draw where telehealth's just not going to help? You have to come in. Have they drawn that line already, or is it a case-by-case thing?
I'm sure it's a case-by-case thing. From what I see, it kind of depends. There's more specialties that can do more online things than others, where they need to come in for more testing and stuff.
Okay. All right. Carolyn?
I was just wondering, does the growth of digital healthcare have any implications on the business of healthcare? Like, if there's less people coming into a clinic or less like physical resources being used, does that affect the business of healthcare?
Yeah, the main thing that I saw was in the emergency department, that there's less people coming into there if they can call a doctor first about their issue, because sometimes they come in and they are taking up time and resources when they maybe don't necessarily need it. So I'm sure it would decrease the amount of resources needed in the hospital, like physical or the actual RNs being there too.
Okay, I was just wondering if the virtualness could cause problems if like certain symptoms are being overlooked or unnoticed because of how limited tech is to like seeing people in person.
Yeah, and part of what we do too is like someone will come in with an issue and then you notice like 5 other issues that they didn't necessarily tell you but you can see and do yourself, or things that you notice from the test that you're doing. So it is definitely like a hindrance to have a screen and they're just telling you what they know and they don't know to be looking for other things too.
Yeah, that goes to what you lose when you don't have the human element, have someone in front of you. So is there any data on that for the last few years of what the percentage is of what's being missed or lost? Or
I didn't see it, but I'm sure that it's out there.
yeah. And then you go to liability. You told me everything was fine, but everything's not fine, and it's because I'm not there in front of you, I'm behind a screen.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right. Meredith?
I was kind of thinking about like all those benefits that you said. I never thought about kind of some of the things that can be taken away when you go virtual that could be really beneficial for nurses. And with what you said about like the older populations maybe not having as much access, or it's just harder for them, if that could be kind of another benefit, because kind of like what you're saying with the emergency rooms, like if younger people are able to use that, if that could kind of put more focus on older people who could be in person more, yeah, if like that, if they could set up structures to be really intentional about that, if it could end up being another benefit.
Yeah, that is a really good idea, because then you can focus on the older people who need care more than the younger people who could maybe use the online resources more.
So you're saying older people can't handle the distance stuff? Yeah, but it is a problem. And again, where do you draw that line? Or is it arbitrary and case by case? If you're above a certain age, you have to come into the office. If you're below a certain age, but does that make you invulnerable to mistakes being made, and having things explained to you? So if you run into problems, I think either way. Yeah, Eric?
Yeah, I'm sure that, after the pandemic, lots of people would go for an option like that. But is the idea of teletriage still flexible enough for people who prefer to go in person to still be able to go?
Right, and when we're talking about that, we're talking about like a hospital setting, so you're already admitted into the hospital when you do that. The virtual side of it comes in more when you're going into a clinic for something, and you can just call your doctor instead and be like, okay, I'm doing fine, can you read me my prescription or whatever. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of pros and cons to both.
Okay.
So the teletriage is after you're admitted?
Mhm.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not, obviously not for a regular doctor's visit or
Right.
something like that. Okay.
To some extent, like my family, I've understood this idea of telehealth. We had a nurse for my family. That the nurse at the pediatric office was really good at handling things over the phone. But I also saw, like, occasionally there'd be times where it was very helpful. There was one time that we did need to take my brother to the ER, and she told us we did. We thought it was a normal asthma attack. It wasn't. She heard us coughing. But then there's also times where we haven't been able to properly convey something over the phone, and it's gone unnoticed. As that pertains to ER visits, how much do you think people err on the side of caution with that, or do you think sometimes things might go unmissed that would need to be ER visits?
Yeah, I'm sure there would be things that would go unmissed with that, or unnoticed, because you can't take all of the vitals and stuff like that over a phone call. But I would say most of the time you can kind of tell too, like, you need to go to the emergency room right now, or hey, can you come into the clinic tomorrow? Like, there's a difference between like life and death, you need to go, and it could wait a day and I'll see you tomorrow, or just come into my office whenever you get the chance.
You probably run into an increasing problem with, I don't want to go in. I'd rather do it, as you're saying, with telehealth, but you're being told you have to come in.
Mm-hmm.
You'll get some resistance to that as people get more accustomed to it. So you run into trouble that way. So, yeah. Micah?
I had a question regarding nursing education specifically. And so, like you said, during COVID, lots of nurses quit because of overload and burnout. But also, there's sort of a joke at this point that people who graduated while all education was online during COVID probably aren't as equipped as those who, learned in person. And I was wondering if there was any research that suggested that also might be a cause of not just burnout, but concerns about quality of care in nursing. And I realize probably, we still haven't seen the full effects of that yet, but I was wondering if you encountered any research about that.
I didn't see any research about it, but I'm sure that it is something that is going to come up soon. Just even, you see like online nursing programs, and it's like, how can you even do that? Like, how are you not doing that in person? But I'm sure that we will see it some as like our generation is starting to go into the hospital and stuff. But at the end of the day, we do have to pass like an NCLEX test to be able to go into the hospital, and you can't really cheat on that. So you got to put in the work beforehand. So hopefully that would be like a barrier that people can pass that if they've been cheating the whole time and not doing what they need to do. And like our instructors can see if we're cheating or not based on if we're showing the skills that we need to show.
Well, and even if you're completely ethical, are you learning the human relations side of things? Where are the nurses? They usually hang together as a group. There they are again. Do y'all train them? Are you split apart? Oh, there's one over here too. Do you train them now in how to do telehealth or anything online as a nurse?
Many programs do, and it's part of their clinical experience as well. Not necessarily telehealth as in communicating with people, but there are a lot of programs that do that. We are not currently doing that at FC.
Yeah. Because that's a slightly different skill set, I would think, and a different kind of follow-up and other things. I just wondered, yeah. Go ahead.
Similar to Micah's question, like, since nursing is very practical and like hands-on field, do you think that if there's like an increase in telehealth, that it'll discourage future students from wanting to even apply to like the nursing program, or discourage them from doing so?
It could. When I was seeing like the teletriage and stuff, it was mainly like those older nurses that would be doing things like that, because it is kind of a physically demanding job too, moving patients who are the same size as you or bigger and stuff. So it would kind of be those nurses, and then that also helps because they have a lot of experience to tell you when you need to go to the ER and stuff like that. So it might, I'm not really sure.
Jordan?
So you said that the telehealth was used after, not teletriage, was used after they were already admitted in the hospital. Is there, I guess, enough flexibility in that for it to be applied outside of the hospital? Or is there like bigger downsides to that? Like for someone who is in home hospice or it has a chronic ongoing disease or issue, would that alleviate any of the pressure that's happening there?
I'm sure it could. Maybe like the in-home health, you could have like someone virtual there for needs and stuff. Yeah, I'm sure it could maybe help those also. I mainly saw it like in a hospital setting because that's where they're seeing the biggest like nursing shortage and stuff. And it would help because then there's like the person there and they're given 8 patients and they can go give them their meds and be doing stuff like that. But then if someone has a question that isn't necessarily related to what's physically going on right in that moment, a different nurse who's online can kind of answer those questions like, I want to be discharged. If my family comes see stuff like that, that maybe isn't like as urgent in the moment.
Doug?
Kind of like going off like the financial aspect of it, is there anything you saw that would change insurance rates or any pricing for people that are in need of care for patients?
I did not see that at all, so I'll look into it though.
Yeah, you kind of wonder, I mean, are nurses that are involved in telehealth going to be paid less? How's that factor into insurance? Again, liability if things are not diagnosed properly. I guess that brings the question, is there a policy? You've got to come in. I mean, in these circumstances, it doesn't matter if you want to do telehealth, you're coming in. Or in other cases, we know you want to come in, but we're not going to let you come in, not at this office. And it may be office by office. But I think you're right. I mean, it's going to, the economics of it are going to drive a good bit of this, I think. Go ahead.
I don't really have a question, but I just thought, like, overall, I think a lot of us can have, like, a negative reaction to, like, the fact that, like you said, the end technology, like, the use of it is increasing, and we're like, okay, that can't be good, and, like, I mean, that's my instinct to be like, obviously, like, in-person care is going to be better, but I think the teletriage thing, like, the thing that, you know, seemed helpful to me about that is, like, you said that virtual RN, they have more time to talk to the patient and cultivate a relationship, and even, like, mentally, like you said, with their depressive symptoms. And so I think that showed me that, like, okay, can be a lot of good in this, and I just thought the teletriage thing overall was really interesting because it makes the virtual RN has more time for that, and like you said, like, they can actually take time to answer the questions like, okay, when am I going home? Because those are sensitive matters and other things too. So I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I'd never seen it before I started like researching the whole topic, and then I was like, actually, I want to go a lot more into that because I had never really heard of it before.
Mm-hmm.
You have something else, Sarah? Todd? Jordan? Anything else, Caroline's? No? Meredith? Mr. Palacios? Nothing else? Okay. Ruth? Nothing. Micah? Well, it does going to change nursing. There's no doubt about that. Some of us would always want to have a physical visit and get to talk to a real nurse. And it's not because I don't know how to use a computer. It's because I'd rather want the human element. But in other cases, it's just not going to be possible. The other thing you didn't touch on was, how does this open up healthcare possibilities for people that can't physically get to a nurse, right? Remote areas, which is really going to be a big benefit to some people. We have the luxury of saying yes or no. Some people are not. So, questions or comments from the group? Bailey?
One of my concerns when you talked about older people like not being able to use the technology, even if they can use the technology, and you were mentioning hackers being one of the problems. There are a lot of really evil people out there who would love to convince someone that they are a nurse, but they could use AI. AI is so advanced now that they could pretend they're a nurse using AI and convince all the information out of someone in the name of, we're gonna give you good healthcare advice. And if the system is so advanced, we're all used to that, we might not think to ourselves, this might not even be a human being talking to me. It could be, you know, a swindler trying to rob me of all I hold dear and my family holds dear or whatever. So I'm just wondering if you came across anything about protecting against AI or con artists in the telehealth field.
Yeah, all that I saw was what I mentioned about just like that being a problem with confidentiality and that people can hack and get into that, and that's definitely a big thing, especially when you're on like public Wi-Fi or things like that. There's just ways for people to get into what you guys are talking about, but I didn't really think about like AI making kind of like nurses when they're not actually nurses.
They could even be trying to like sell snake oil. Like they could have fake medicine and trying to convince you, oh, I'm a nurse and you should take this because it will heal you. And some people might buy that. They might even sell their house because this is a miracle cure. Like if we're all so used to it, that could be a big problem in the future.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't know, but you've convinced me of a second career. This could be something. No, I think, like we do with credit and other things, I mean, it would take the patient, I think, reaching out to the healthcare professional, probably in exchange of confidential, you know, whatever, verifiable numbers or whatever it's going to be before you would ever give any private information. No one's, I would hope, going to give out their social security number over the phone, and yet you find people that do, because people are easily fooled. So there'd have to be checks put in there, but you're right. Anytime there's technology, there's the opportunity for people to take advantage. Miss Abby, you have a question?
So I was driving back from Texas after the holidays, and I had a sore throat, so I dialed up the telemedicine people, and I was like, hey, I have a sore throat, I think it's strep, and will you call me in a prescription for antibiotics? And she was like, yep. So did you find anything about it contributing to like antibiotic resistance? Because it's just, I didn't get tested for strep, like, I mean, I did have it, I'm pretty sure, but I'm sure a lot of people call in when they have a sore throat thinking, oh, it's strep throat, and people just get prescribed antibiotics, and they might not have it. Did you see anything about that in your research?
I didn't, but it's kind of funny because I had the same exact story from last year. I thought I had strep, so I called the telehealth doctor because I'm not home to like go to my actual doctor. She was like, oh yeah, here's your medicine, and it ended up not being strep because that didn't help at all. And I was like, oh, okay. So there definitely is that too, that you can just call and get a prescription for something, and that might not be what's going on, and it could even make it worse in the long run.
Anything else? All right, so we know what to do now. Next time we feel bad, we just call, prescription, and go on. Thank you very much, Jen. Communication, right? And the human side of things, more than just the academic side of things. Like Micah said, you know, what if they're not educated well? Well, they have the ability to communicate well, which kind of goes to what our nursing programs need to do in the future. Chip in with those things. Todd Houchel has a presentation for us tonight about macroeconomics and how they were affected by the pandemic. So we've seen many things from the infusions of capital to higher interest rates. So Todd will explain it to us tonight, and I will get your PowerPoint for you. So give me just 1 second.
Well, I'd like to thank you for coming out to our honors evening. I appreciate you guys taking the time to come and listen to me, Jenna, and Jordan, and give our presentations this night. It means a lot, and your encouragement and support means a lot. But before I begin, I need to give you a quick message from my lawyer before I present this. The information provided on this platform, including but not limited to market data, analysis, commentary, and recommendations, is for informational and educational purposes only. This is not intended as and should not be construed as professional, financial, investment, or trading advice. This platform does not guarantee the accuracy, completeness, or reliability of any information or analysis provided, and users should exercise their own judgment and discretion when using the information provided on this platform. I lied, that's not my lawyer, that's ChatGPT. But now you cannot hold me in any form of liability for whatever I'm about to say tonight. So I had to get that off my shoulders real quick. You guys were there, we were all there whenever it happened. You got that email that said, guess what? No school for like 2 or 3 weeks, and let's go, we're in, we're so ready. But there's more than that happened. There's more than just school getting canceled, and you guys know that. We all felt those feelings, the emotions, the scare, the frightening. Okay, well, what's going to happen next? And that's what I'd like to talk about tonight. Because, congratulations, you lived through something huge, something that nobody else has lived through, and that's the COVID-19 pandemic. It had disastrous consequences on our economy, on the world, on families, and overall, we made it to this point. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit more in depth and a little more in detail. And so what I'd first like to do is talk about just a little bit of background. So when we're talking about COVID-19, we remember it happened in early March is when we first started to see the spread of the pandemic, and the shutdowns began then. And of course, we start to see the effects that happen in the stock market. As an investor, if you look at the Dow Jones, you're looking at about a 37% drop. I'm not trying to use too many nerd numbers, but you're looking about a 37% drop, and then in the S&P 500, you're looking about a 35% drop. What that makes this point in time is the shortest, but one of the most deadliest recessions we've seen in just a short amount of time. In barely a month, we've seen our economy crash, and now we're having to pick up the pieces of it and keep going. And then in the years that followed this, when we look into 2022, we see the highest inflation rate we've ever seen of 8.5% since 1981. And so these are large and they're very dramatic events that have occurred in the United States economic history. So do not fear. We're going to break it down. We're going to make it real simple with 3 things. If you want to look at this point in time and learn about it, there's 3 things we can look at. Consumer spending, miscommunication of the government and society, and then of course the Federal Reserve. So first we'll talk about it right here with consumer spending. Whenever the pandemic first hit, we're all locked in our homes, we don't get to go outside, we see jobs begin to shift, and then what we see a lot is the shifts that happen in the economy. We've seen the stock market drop to this point, but then what we begin to see too is a change in how consumers are spending their money. During this time, the administration gave out government stimulus checks in order to provide consumers extra cash flow in order to invest more back into the economy. The economy's tanked, we need more money, we need investment, we need growth, and so the Federal Reserve begins to print more money, and the administration gives out stimulus checks in order to aid this. And so one thing we can look at during this time is we can look at the spending that consumers did, the expenditures. Out of 14 different categories, we begin to see 5 that had positive change in comparison to the others. So when you look at this, apparel and services, personal care products, education, food, all took hits, major hits. In general, expenditures have been increasing over time. People were spending more money as time went on. But we get to this point, we see a 3% decline right off the top. Everything gets cut down. For some reason, we're spending more money on housing and cash contributions and reading. I don't know why everyone wanted to start reading all of a sudden, but they did. And so this is a big shift that we see when we see in the spending of our economy. And so another part to look at that when we look at consumer spending is also the unemployment. The United States Bureau of Labor Statistics, the BLS, they noticed a large increase in unemployment. I'm sure you guys understood that and felt that in your own personal lives as well. But what unemployment does is it shifts the consumer price index, CPI, or a fancy word for inflation. And so basically, whenever you become unemployed, you are not going to live the same lifestyle that you did before. So you're going to cut back on your spending, you're going to start to change a little bit, and this is going to end up changing demand. And so as we look at this over time, we saw the shifts whenever COVID first hit in 2020, and then over time we start to see changes then here in 2021. Increases back in entertainment, healthcare, reading not so much, I don't know what happened there either. Education is still down, but we start to see positive shifts more into spending. And of course we get to 2022, entertainment takes a huge hit. We see things, more increases in cash contributions, which is something that's very important to consumer spending and the economy as we're talking about here. But then also in apparel services, housing, transportation, yada, yada, yada. It keeps increasing. But then we're going to talk about the next part of it. There's consumer spending, but now we're going to talk about the miscommunication of it. Because during this time, we all know what happened. Schools, businesses, organizations, they all shut down. Things are changing. They're not the same anymore. And the media at this time gave conflicting reports. They didn't know what was going on. The government didn't know what was going on at this point in time. I can still remember being absolutely terrified at age 16, cowering as to what the government was going to do next. Me and Papa would listen to like the daily Donald Trump updates on the radio or something like that. Just like, he didn't know what he was doing either, I can't even lie. But as time goes on, no one really knows what's going on. And no one can really truly make sense of it. And so in October of 2021, this is when we see some of the largest supply chain issues all over the world. During this time, it was nearly 5 times as expensive for us to ship over to China. When ships would get into port, you're waiting about a week until they could be decontaminated, and then the cargo be dispersed to where it needs to go. So as you can imagine, right now our supply chain is a mess. We don't know where our goods are going, we don't know where our imports, our exports are, and so everything's kind of a mess once we get to this point. And then what we'll look at more then is we've got our supply chain that's in disorder, but then also our stock market. We've already talked about how the stock market took such a major hit. And the other thing is too, is like when you're an investor and you just watch your stock drop 35 points, that's going to shift how your mind thinks a little bit and the way you're going to spend your money as time goes on. And so the volatility, the scariness of the market, it's got people on edge. And so spending, there's kind of a disagreement and kind of a miscommunication about how to spend and how people should adjust their portfolios accordingly. Now follow me on this here for a little bit. There's another part of miscommunication is job expectations. Whenever the COVID-19 pandemic hit, we see a major change into what jobs should be doing during this time and what the expectations are of employees. So, for example, 33% of all businesses increased when it came to telework in some sort of fashion. Nearly 50% of jobs at the start of the pandemic were using telework compared to the barely 5% that were using it before we started this pandemic. And what you'd be surprised here is, yes, job expectations are changing. Payment went up over all businesses. 1/4 of them had a pay increase of some kind. And most people reported, according to the BLS, is that people weren't taking a change in their schedule and they weren't taking a change in their pay. So what is changing among their job expectations? And it's not necessarily what we see in the company, but more of what we see in the worker. Whenever you go from being a blue-collar construction worker and then you are told to go home and not to resume your work for an extended period of time, that's going to change how you think and how you're going to approach your job whenever you return to that. When you're a white-collar worker and you're able to work from the safety and the comfort of your home, that's also going to change how you approach your job as well. Because one minute I could be doing my work, the next I could be playing Fortnite. And so it's important to understand that the expectations for the worker as well are changing as time goes on. And so then we can talk about here then is the Federal Reserve. Everybody's talking about the Fed. Personally, I've never met him before, but he seems like a not very nice guy. And so what we see here, and what we need to understand, is what the Federal Reserve does. In their mission statement, the Federal Reserve claims to be in charge of open market operations, discount rate, and reserve requirements. Enough nerd talk. All that really means is money supply and interest rates is what they're going to do. Is they're trying to manipulate the US dollar and protect us against inflation. So within the year of 2020, the Fed printed $3.3 trillion. If that doesn't give you a bad taste in your mouth, I don't know what will. But as this happened as well, they started to begin to drop interest rates from 1% to 0.25% in March of 2020. And the reason the Fed did this was because we've taken 35 points off of our stock market. We need money back in the economy. And so to spur consumer spending, they gave out stimulus checks and of course dropped the interest rates next to nothing, which means this would encourage more people to be able to spend more money into the economy. So we've got low interest rates, which then over time will increase our demand across the entire economy. People have more money, they're going to want to spend it. They want to do something with it. And of course, inevitably that ends up leading to our inflation that we see here later on. And with this higher demand, the problem with it too is we've got a miscommunication about our supply chains, about what we can get. I want to spend my money, but what can I spend my money on? I don't know, because my shipment hasn't got in yet. And so what we see with the high inflation rate is we're looking at about 8.5%, which is the highest it's been since 1981. And I know what you're thinking. You're like, under Reagan? No way. Even the best heroes have their flaws. But in late 2021, the Wall Street Journal came out with a commentary stating that the Fed was the main culprit behind the rising inflation. And this was before seeing the record high inflation rates we're going to see here in 2022, when everybody's worried about the rising prices of gas and everything that we see there. And what's interesting here about the Fed and what they're doing is we've never seen inflation grow the way that it had after this. When you look back at the 1980s, the 60s, and the 70s, it took about 12 years to inflation get up to the point that it did in 1981. And so what was confusing and somewhat scary about this was that we see the Federal Reserve implement a task that literally brought the fastest recession first, but then of course we see this inflation that's off the charts next. And so over time we see the Fed into today, as you can see on the screen behind me, is that the Fed has taken steps into taking the lower interest rates that we had and just slowly stop and slow inflation by increasing inflation rates to where we had the 5.25%, which is today, now we have a 3.5% inflation rate today. And so when I said don't be scared and like you shouldn't fear, I meant it. Because we have a different perspective than everybody else does when it comes to the economy. In Proverbs 3:13-14, it states that, "Blessed is a person who finds wisdom and one who obtains understanding. For her profit is better than the profit of silver, and her produce better than gold." In Matthew 6:19-21, Jesus says, "Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." And then later on he says in a couple verses, he says, "Do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, nor about your body, what you will put on. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothing? Look at the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap, nor gather into barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not of more value than they?" The truth is this right here. We have a different perspective compared to the entire rest of the world. Whenever we see catastrophic and dangerous economic circumstances that we've seen here, we have a different perspective. Our perspective is that we are going to heaven. It is a higher, nobler perspective, and that we don't have to worry, be anxious, and be troubled by the things that are happening in the world today. And so, the truth is that we can take heart in that no matter what the consumer behavior is like, no matter how bad miscommunication is among the world, no matter what the Federal Reserve is doing, that God is still in control, and that no matter what happens, we can take hope and we can take heart. Thank you.
Todd, another element is paying people not to work usually breeds bad behavior. They'll not want to work once they've been paid not to work. So that's another piece of this, which we've not yet tamed. So, Sarah Scarborough, a question?
I was just wondering, kind of when you were talking about like job expectations and how those changed, I guess I was wondering, like, for people to come back, like coming back to their jobs, did you like find any research about like people like, okay, change certain things about the job so like people would come back, or I don't know, just like was there changes in those jobs so that people would come back to normal, if there is such a thing as coming back to normal? But
A lot of it, what we see among workers is really the reluctancy to come back. It's like once you're able to stay at home and work from the front room instead of having to go commute every day, is that we see a lot of people wanting to stay home more than compared to the job would shift over time as we see, like as we're saying, there's more telework now available than before, but for the most part what we're seeing is a reluctancy in the worker not to want to come back.
Dr. Gilliam or Mr. Dunsford, what's the percentage of people who are willfully out of the workplace right now? It's not unemployment, it's just they've subtracted themselves. Isn't there a rate?
Yeah, I'm not on top of the current number, but it's more than the unemployment rate. The stated unemployment rate being around 4%.
Yeah.
Probably another as many as 5 to 10%.
Yeah, there's a percentage of the workforce that I think it's just 62 or 63% of the population that can work is working right now. And at some point, the math doesn't work. You can't afford to pay people not to work under whatever programs you have. That's been part of the danger. Your generation has now grown up with where the expectations in a workplace, can I work part of my job from home, part of the job on the site? And you're finding that in a lot of jobs, including engineering and nursing. And so how sustainable is that becomes the question. So the expectations become unreal, Sarah. That's the bottom line. I want to work, I want to get paid, but I don't want the risk. And how long do you account for that or accommodate that becomes the question. And that's up to every business to decide. So, Jordan?
I appreciated what you said at the end, and I also think that while we do have that other perspective that is so relieving and so, like, it relieves so much stress, we also have the responsibility to have a knowledge about what's going on so that we can make those wise decisions. So I really appreciated how you tied those together.
Jen? I was just wondering if you kind of like saw research on if those stimulus checks did help the economy during COVID.
So what we see for the most part is as time goes on, the economy did recover. Like right now, the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ and the Dow Jones are all hitting highs right now. Maybe not the NASDAQ. But for the most part, everybody's doing real good right now. And so what the general consensus is that I found is that, yes, the stimulus checks have worked. A lot of people are aggravated about the inflation that came afterwards, but then also it just depends on like what your view on it was, because some people are like, oh man, we're getting paid to stay at home, and like that's like kind of part of it, but a lot of it too is the goal that we're trying to stimulate the economy. But for the most part, it has worked overall. The amount of money that was printed is still questionable.
Well, what's a stimulus check designed to do but replace production? And it's government printed money, so it's not produced by private business, which means it's just printed. That's the definition of inflation. You're just pumping capital into the system to keep the system moving. And again, that's got a limited shelf life. You can only do that so long. Is it political? Yeah, no, there's definitely a political angle to that too. So, yeah, you raise a good question. But long term, some people point to that directly as causing inflation. The huge influx of capital. It's just printed money. What makes a dollar worth a dollar, Todd?
Well, it used to be when we had gold, but we don't got that anymore.
No, that's not been for 2 generations. What makes a dollar worth a dollar? Because we believe it's a dollar. If you look at your dollar, it says the United States of America, Federal Reserve issued. It's a dollar because we accept it's a dollar. It's built on trust, it's built on confidence. So the minute we decide it's not worth $1 anymore, it's only 79 cents today, we're all in big trouble. So we're not there yet. So, Carolyn?
Sarah touched on this a little bit, but you said that nearly 50% of jobs involved telework during COVID. So obviously it's still prevalent because like that was Jenna's whole point. But has it like stabilized? Like was there a major decrease at any point since COVID in telework, or has it just been like a gradual decline, or has it stayed about the same since then?
I'm definitely gonna plead ignorance on that because I did not see anything. I didn't go further in the research like I should have. But for the most part, what you can see in businesses is most people are going back. Just a personal opinion.
They are, because they're being told they have to. But again, there's a tolerance for that in every business that varies region to region in the country, and business owner by business owner. There's no governmental mandate. There's a lot of government workers in Washington that haven't been back for 3 or 4 years now. It's hard to get people to go back when they're used to working in their pajamas. You know, I mean, I'm not being funny, it's just reality. And really, with kids at home, it's far harder for 2 parents to go back to work. That's a huge, huge impact for people. So can I stay at home? And if I can't, can I go to another job where I can? That becomes the question for people, because it becomes part of a lifestyle. So, yeah, but it varies, and the numbers change every week. So, Carolyn?
My question kind of goes along with Jenna's. I had an economics teacher in high school who talked about how the stimulus checks were not spent totally how the government thought they would be, like towards loans, and it wasn't put back into the market or to businesses. Would that have been hurtful in the overall effectiveness of it?
So if we go back to the expenditures that I was showing earlier, for the most part, that's kind of like what we begin to get worried about, is because the cash contributions, that's definitely some part of it right there. But for the most part, like you're saying, there are some things that like, okay, are people investing it into the stock market like we want them to? Because not all of it is just, okay, I'm just gonna go buy stock right now, but also part of it is just like, am I going to buy goods that are available? And so I think there is definitely a portion of that, of people not doing what we think they're gonna do. Because honestly, like, I complain a lot about the Fed, and I complain a lot about like maybe what people did during this time, but like, we didn't know any better. And so a lot of people, it's difficult to make these decisions, especially when we look at the market. We can look at numbers and graphs all day, but for the most part, it is based on human emotion and what they're choosing to do.
What do you think people invested in?
I got reading here on my chart, but
Well, anything that's going to make your life from home easier. I mean, the stocks that boomed were stocks that had to do with people delivering things. And Home Depot and Lowe's, because people were sitting at home looking around thinking, I've got to fix this and I got to fix that. Those stocks boomed. And then meme stocks, which are basically nothing stocks, like GameStop, you probably heard about before. So you just invest in things in meme stocks because on social media people started to pump, like through Robinhood, you know, what stocks to buy. And that got to be a thing because you're sitting at home and it's basically legalized betting at that point. Well, I think that'll go up. And then you get a bubble that builds. And like in any bubble, some people are going to pull out near the top and make money, and some people are caught still investing in something that declines in value. Another thing is Bitcoin. That rose in interest during this time as well. But basically anything that's going to help me work or live my life better from home, that's where stocks increased dramatically. You know, huge decrease, but that was the shortest bear market, I think, guys, in history, I think, because it bounced back within months and recovered the losses. So if you kept investing, then you made your money back. But nobody likes to take a 25% hit. So, Meredith?
I just have kind of more of a comment. But I was thinking about, like, through all of this, all the things that you mentioned that were just about how our values were affecting where we're spending our money, or just behavior in general, like the time you're spending, where you're spending money, the job expectations, that kind of stuff. So I think it was interesting for me to think about how obviously there was effects of COVID with like the quarantine times that changed the supply chain, but so much of the economic changes were just due to how much reevaluating we were doing, and kind of like what everyone was just saying, where people were putting their money was because we're all reevaluating so much. So just thinking about how COVID changed our values and then that changed the economy was big interesting tie-in, I guess.
And kind of like going off of what I was saying earlier about human emotion, a lot of it too of like, when I think of COVID is I think of the March, the April, the May that we all spent out of school for the most part. It's like, that's kind of like one thing I struggle with is getting like that broader scope of like, hey, post-COVID economics, there's more than just what we lived through right then and there. And I agree with that.
Did you read more?
Did
you
during
read more?
COVID, I did. Yeah,
Oh, yeah?
that was me up there.
Yeah?
Mhm.
Well,
Bring it on.
you think about it, everybody was reading more or doing, the other thing that was flying off the shelves, if I think back, jigsaw puzzles. I could not find a jigsaw puzzle Christmas Day because people are stuck at home. We saw people out on the golf course in Temple Terrace that would never go out on the golf course because you just go out there with your family that you remember. So the reevaluation of where you put your money, in a free society, you can make your choices. And if they're giving you money, well then. Yeah. Eric?
I don't know a whole lot about economics, so I want to thank you for putting it in terms that I could understand. But my question is about, so knowing that the pandemic was global, and you talked about how the global market took a hit, do you have any other details about how other countries responded to the pandemic economically, or at least how relying on international markets influenced our situation?
I do not. I looked a lot at the U.S. and that's kind of, looking in hindsight, I kind of wish I did because I'm curious, like when we were talking about trade exports with China, because that was a country that got hit hard by the pandemic, and especially like with sanctions and quarantines and things like that. I am curious to see like to see what the effect was on them for sure.
Everybody took a hit in their national economies. It depends on how much they shut down. Nordic, I want to say Sweden, but I may be wrong, Sweden or Denmark didn't shut down at all for any length of time. It was Sweden. So they would see much less of a hit, but every country's different. So.
I was thinking, like looking at this from a history perspective, like looking forward, because something similar, you know, the economy rises and falls. Do you think like the lesson to be learned maybe is that do you think maybe the government overreacted a little bit and its number changes, like it's struck, because you see that huge rebound effect. Do you think maybe there was a little too strong, or it was so unprecedented that you really couldn't know what to do with it?
I would probably go with the latter in saying that it's very unprecedented. One thing me and Dr. Chris Bell talked about a lot is a lot of economists right now. So this year for the S&P 500, they're looking at about 8% growth, which is like typically looking at like 5, 6, 7%. 8% is a good number, and so they're foreseeing a lot of growth for this year. And so one thing that one of the economists were saying that we were listening to was, for the most part, she's mostly buying a new playbook. Like, she kind of threw it out. She's not saying that everything before COVID is worthless, but what she's saying is that like you can't only base your numbers off of what happened before, because the game has changed a little bit. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. I don't know what the government would do, because honestly, like kind of we're saying, like human behavior, this is something that's very interesting. To see us bounce back like that afterwards so quickly, it's interesting to see that. But I'm not sure what they would do next, but it is definitely unprecedented, that's for sure.
And don't forget, the role of the government is to provide a stable currency, limit inflation, and keep a dollar that's accepted as a dollar, and not try to micromanage the economy. If you get into that, the micromanaging of the economy, then you take it out of private hands, and that's not a place that traditionally Americans have wanted the Fed to go. The Federal Reserve's job is supposed to be defined, but in times of emergency like this, they do infuse capital into the market. But eventually all that's got to be paid for. And you pay for it with higher interest rates to break inflation. So they were higher than what they are now. Inflation, or interest rates, used to push 20% in the early 80s, which is incredible to us today, but 20%. But that was to break inflation, which had grown so much through the 70s. Inflation grew in the 70s because Congress could now spend money in the 70s without the controls they'd had prior to that. So they spent money the way they'd never spent it before. And that led to a number of problems, including inflation. So, Ruth?
You've shown that people want to spend money and are gonna spend money regardless, like, so do you think that if we were to go into another pandemic in the near future, economists could predict on where people's expenditure would be going? And if, like, could you steer this money elsewhere to keep the economy afloat?
I'd like to go back to my former disclaimer, this is not financial advice. But for the most part, I would say, kind of like we were talking about, a lot of it's human behavior, and so we don't know what's gonna happen here. Because honestly, when I look at some of the expenditures here, I'm like, really, food, not as much? Like, how's that cut down on? And so, I would say maybe we can use this as a template going forward, but for the most part, it is unprecedented, and hopefully we wouldn't have to go through something like this again. But I'm not sure what the next step holds. I'm curious about that.
Yeah, it's an excellent point. I think you've got to take notes here if you're smart, right? What's the tendency of people in situations like this or cases of emergency? What are they likely to spend money on? How do we want to tailor any kind of stimulus? And how should we react to that later? And it depends on how long you shut things down for. Yeah, that was shocking, unprecedented. So you want to take some notes from that. So they'll be doing, analysis of this for, you got your PhD topic right now, because they'll be doing analysis of this for the next 50 to 100 years. Micah?
I was going to ask, we've been talking a lot about the stimulus checks and how they probably created this sense of reliance on the government and maybe a sense of entitlement of how the government should treat you economically. I was wondering if you found any research that suggested that increased the sense of reliance or entitlement in other areas, like when we talk about free education or free healthcare or other areas like that.
I didn't see anything when it comes to those topics specifically, but kind of like what we're talking about with the role of the Fed is really like, it's mostly interest rates and money supply when it comes down to what their role is. But the one thing we see is, like we're saying, in times of crisis, emergency, people, that role kind of just, playbook kind of gets thrown out a little bit. It's like, hey, we need you to do this. And so that's what, like, I am curious of, because honestly, even like my mind as an investor now too is like, okay, the Fed plays a major role, which is true, but I think it's like, it's something that we need to keep in mind of. It's like, what is their role, what is their place? And it may be one of those things, like you're saying, we are becoming more dependent on them than we should be.
Man, it's been like that for a while. The Fed's just 100 years old, give or take. It was founded at Jekyll Island, Georgia in the 19-teens, so it's just over 100 years. But for the last 50 years, if a Federal Reserve chairman says something, it affects the stock market immediately, while they're talking. If the Fed says they're going to cut rates in the next 3 months, stocks will surge, because that means that the price of money is coming down. If they say they're going to keep rates where they are, or now they're saying they're not going to raise them, that will depress the stock market. That's supposed to raise or lower the heartbeat of the economy. If you think about money like blood in the body, the more money you pump into the body, that's like pumping blood into a body. And you're going to make the heart burst. You can't race that quickly. But if you pull too much money out of the economy, it collapses. And so the role of the Federal Reserve is more or less like a stabilizer in that way. And so the interest rates, the money supply play that role. But that's a very fine line to play. But the markets are watching all the time, and that affects your jobs to come. That affects your opportunities. Everything from healthcare to real estate, everything in between. So what people can afford for a higher education, everything. What the price of a used car is going to be, everything. So it's pretty powerful. It's a powerful job. You have anything else? Anything else, Ruth? David? Eric?
I just really appreciate your spiritual connection. Uncertainty is something that you talked about a lot. Unemployed people don't know how they're going to make ends meet. Governments don't know how to go forward. And even just the subject of economics. There's a lot of uncertainty in the social sciences. So I really liked going back to the idea of faith, or the assurance of things that we hope for, the conviction of things not seen. I just want to thank you. Very good.
Yeah, because if a $30 trillion economy can't make you feel better at night. Yeah. Anything else, Mary? Caroline's? Anything? How about from the audience? Anything on macroeconomics, sir?
So this is just an observation, but I've noticed that there's a lot of people in my generation who totally anticipate either being self-employed or running their own business or working from home, and that's both men and women. That a lot of them are here at school, they're getting a degree, but they're expecting, all these things. That I feel that maybe the generations behind us probably didn't assume those things because it wasn't really as much of an option. They would get a degree and they go work for somebody, but now because of maybe the pandemic or just technology as it's progressed, there's much more of an assumption of, oh, I'm just gonna go get a job where I can work from home, and it's just really easy like that. So whether that's a reality or not, or just an expectation for my generation, did you do did you see any research that would have some insight into maybe how that's gonna change the economy in the future because so many more businesses are being started or people wanting to work from home, that kind of thing?
No. For the most part, I looked at a very macro scale, but I dabbled a little bit into the micro scale, like we're talking about, of like with consumers and with small businesses as well. And that's kind of what I am curious of, is like you're saying, people today, like the hot new trend is becoming an entrepreneur. And so that's what's interesting to me is how to, as we see here, okay, I can work from home, there goes the 9 to 5. Like I can do my work in 2-3 hours, and I don't have to do a 9 to 5 like everybody else does. And so I am curious to see as time goes on and as the markets shift, what people do and how they react to that. Because honestly, when it comes down to entrepreneurship and stuff like that, it's like, what value are you giving back? Like, what value are you bringing to the table? What are you investing into the economy? And so I think that's what's like, and honestly, the economy will decide that, of like, okay, if they're bringing value, then we're going to reward them with higher profits and things like that. And so I think what's kind of what I'm curious about is where that goes, of like, okay, we got all these people that don't want to work anymore, but what are you bringing to the table that nobody else is? So that's interesting.
Anything else? Yes, ma'am.
With that large shift to like remote work, was there a noted change in productivity, either more productive or less productive that was seen?
For the most part, that's one of the biggest pressing questions on my mind. I didn't find a lot about that. From what I can see is that there really wasn't. When, according to the BLS, they did say that there was a major shift, especially when it came to income of the worker, but also when it came to productivity of the company as well. So like, the company also, for those that didn't lay off their employees, they would invest into their employees more. And so that's what I'm kind of curious of, to see if like, okay, they're investing more into their employees, but how much are their employees giving back? And so that was something I was very curious about, and I still like to go look into that more.
I actually have a little bit of insight into that. I did some research on that topic closely after the pandemic, around 2021, 2022. And for the majority, it did increase productivity because a lot of industries have a lot of regulations, just filler time. It's like going to a public school. You have a little bit of like work with a whole lot of filler. And there's a lot of jobs that have that same kind of filler, that you're able to get the work done, but then there's all these other like rules and regulations you have to follow that slow you down. And so there was a lot of jobs that increased productivity, and the people who took advantage of that opportunity to work from home and started doing other things, the majority of the time would get laid off.
Anything else from the group? Yes, ma'am.
Did you come across a reason why it was toilet paper in particular that would help in the job? Like, I still never have heard why was it toilet paper.
The jury's still out.
You know what has kept prices in check sometimes is wholesalers or manufacturers will make just enough. They won't keep huge inventories. And in that case, the just enough mentality ran short. You had a run on things, and then people panicked. And anytime you get a panic, you have more people going to the store and create more of a shortage. But they're creating the paper products to reach the shelves in just enough, because we we can gauge inventories now like never before. Every time you scan a barcode, you're telling them what's left on the shelf. And so they're able to gauge these things so precisely, they thought they could always just get just enough done, not waste anything, get just enough to the shelf. And once you create a panic on top of what could be a shortage, it snowballs.
Part of that paper issue with the toilet paper, the paper towel, there was hoarding going on, as you said, the reaction to it. But I think that from what I understand of what was happening with that particular part of the supply chain it was the transportation was not available. Even Costco warehouse, when you're in their store and there is no toilet paper, and when they get it, they let one person have like one package but not two, and all of that. The response the company was giving was, we've got plenty of paper products in our distribution center. We can't get them to the store because the truckers are not available to get them here. And a lot of what was happening in the ports at the same time was there were hundreds of ships that were offshore and within American waters, and there were many more beyond American waters that could not get into the port to even unload, and then the dock workers to unload the ships were not available. So it's not so much that the paper products were just mysteriously constrained, this whole supply chain was really constricted in so many ways.
And that stretched like 5-10 miles into the ocean, those boats. And it took more than, what, a year and a half to straighten it out? So, yeah, not good. So part of that's just getting people back to work and then reconfiguring things from there. Anything else? Is your hand up, Brent?
Well, I was going to ask one quick question, Todd. Thank you. Federal Reserve became quite a theme through your topic and through the conversation tonight. So I'm curious from your perspective, there's a lot of dialogue right now amongst politicians about what the future role of the Fed should be, or should we even have a Federal Reserve? I'm curious, what position would you take today on that if you were to take a position based upon what you've researched at this point?
If I haven't made myself clear now. Honestly, for me, I think the dollar should be backed by something, but also the way we are manipulating it, it does help whenever we have the consumer supporting it. It's a risky line because, like we're saying, we come out of something like the COVID-19 pandemic and we got 8% inflation, something we haven't dealt with in a long time. And that's what's interesting is, where do we go from here? What's the next step? And honestly, I guess for now we can keep them around, but maybe after a while we can do something.
Well, the historical perspective is, without a Fed and without something like the old Bank of the United States from the 18th century, 19th century, we had huge swings in the economy, even in the 19th century, with far less of an industrialized system. I kind of wonder what it would be like with the shocks to the system. You might have deeper troughs and higher peaks. The Fed tended to, at least over time, level that out. But who knows? If it's not the Fed, it's going to be something.
I'm curious how we go forward. Can we back it by gold and silver?
If you want less money, I mean, that's been a political question too. Do you make dollars at a 16-to-1 ratio, silver to gold? Was one that goes back 100 years. But then do you go back to a gold standard? Well, do you want half the money that you have right now in your pockets? That would force prices to come down. You also are making less money. That goes to what you value, like Meredith mentioned. So who knows? But that would change things dramatically, especially in a $27, $28 trillion economy.
I think that's a really important point, though. And I think it's important. It's easy to have a very negative attitude toward the Fed, but to Dr. Crispell's point, if you look starting in after our Great Depression, and you look in the 50s under John Keynes' theory related to fiscal policy, and then Friedman's theories of monetary policy a little bit later, all governed by that Federal Reserve, our economy has had a very good run of stability for 75 years or so. So the reason I ask the question is because it is quite controversial, and there's many sides. It may be a good aspect for you to continue to dig in your research, because if you look, there are many politicians right now who are clamoring, let's get rid of the Fed, but to what what's on the other side. And I think all of us do well. I appreciate Lay's comment that all of it, we have a responsibility spiritually to understand what's going on around us, so we can be praying for the right decisions and for the right leadership to emerge and for the right things to occur. But there are positives to what that steering mechanism or stabilization mechanism has done. It's good for us to see both sides of that.
But it's unelected, undemocratic, and they control our lives. You blow it up, right? Yes, sir.
Todd, I'm curious, you made a couple references to like the emotional aspect of behavior and how people respond to things. With the period of very low interest rates, it created a lot of opportunities for people to refinance their homes at historically unprecedented interest rates. I mean, my parents financed their first house in 1950s for 4% interest, and people were refinancing loans during COVID for under 3%. So we're talking over 60, 70 years, historically unprecedented interest rates. Well, now those people are sitting in their homes, and they're sitting there with 20, 30-year mortgages at less than 3% or under 4%. I'm wondering about how you and your classmates and how people coming out of college in the near future or in the not too distant future, looking at a market where in a climate of low interest rates, we also saw a rapid rise of housing prices. And Tampa has been experiencing something like I saw in Southern California for many years, where now fewer than 60% of the population can afford a house right now in Tampa Bay. So with the low interest rate climate that was intended to stimulate the economy and keep the blood flowing through the system, we have a lot of people who've taken advantage of that, but with high housing prices, and now interest rates are higher, I'm wondering what the emotional and psychological and behavioral kind of implications there are for the near-term and longer-term housing market, not just here, but around the country. What are your thoughts on the future of housing and where it is now, and your optimism for your ability to have a career and have a home?
Because that really is like, that's like the one thing I didn't right there. But for the most part, like I would say that's what's difficult is because we look at why would you sell your house if you're rocking at 3% interest on your mortgage? Like, why would you want to change that? And so that's what I am curious to see is like, as we see multifamilies growing, or as we see it start to slow down, like what's that going to change going forward? And I'm curious about that. My screen disconnected, but I had a slide about real estate, and then nearly, I believe, if I can find it right, February of 22, you're looking about nearly 60% of homes were sold above their asking price. And so for the most part, like we see that, we all saw the shift in prices going up. It's like, okay, what does that mean to affordability like 5, 10 years down the road? What does it mean for 2 or 3 years whenever we graduate? It's interesting to see what's going to happen. For me personally, I would say, honestly, I think they're going to, like, what goes up is going to come down, I think, at some point in time. And which is tough to say, especially like when we see inflation being rocky like it was. In my opinion, I think it's going to come back down, but that's really just because I want to buy a house someday.
Well, it may drive market expansion elsewhere, and not in a place like Tampa or Southern California. That could be. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you very much, Todd. Appreciate your work.
Jordan, you're going to talk to us about something not business, right?
Correct.
Mysterious number. It's not.
It's not.
Yeah. All right, so Jordan's going to present to us about how best to communicate when it comes to education and teach others so that they remember. So come on up, Jordan.
Hello. I know I'm the third person. I know we're tired. Thank you for staying. So just kind of to wake us up a little bit, I actually do want you to answer verbally if you want to. How many of you have seen that word before or know what it means and I didn't tell you?
Yes.
Okay, good. So if I put these up here, what is Roy G. Biv? So that's just a bunch of random numbers. Who knows what that means? Rainbow. Okay. What is SOHCAHTOA besides Indian? For math. Still math. What is PEMDAS? Or, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally.
Order of operation.
And then last two, more music. Face, and every good boy does fine. All right, so we've already got this down. So these are mnemonic devices, which is basically any kind of a technique that is used to help acquire and maintain memory. Just keep it in there, gets it in there, super easy. So a lot of the ways that we'll see this is in a song. If you hear a song, you're going to memorize it faster. Half of the female population knows every word to every Taylor Swift song ever written. They're catchy, they're popular. So just anything like that, so keywords, stuff like that. So there's been a lot of research into the effectiveness of mnemonic devices, especially in the last about 50 years. And it has been proven over and over and over again that people who use mnemonic devices have better memory retention than those who do not. So there's been a little bit of research on just kind of how it all works. How many people have seen Inside Out? Okay, cool. Any actual psychologists in here? I'm sorry, I try and get it real quick. So there were 3 cognitive psychologists named Ortnoy, Rumelaart, and Neisser, however you want to say it. And they put forward the idea that memory is structuralized and encoded in things called schemata. So in Inside Out, this is how I thought of it. In Inside Out, when they're lost in the maze of all the little memories, they're all organized into those different things. They have long-term memory, you have memories from your childhood, things like that, the way it's all organized, that helped me picture it. So then there were 2 ways that they put forward to encode those memories. Like whenever they see it on the screen, it falls into the little ball and then it rolls down. 2 ways to do that. You have rote or repetition, which is just straight out memorizing it. It's meant to hold information for some immediate purpose. So you got a test coming up, you're cramming at 1 a.m. the night before, there's that one. And then there's also elaborate encoding, which is something that relates new information that you're taking in to something that's already in your long-term memory. And that's kind of what we're wanting to focus on with mnemonics. So then the big question is, how can we effectively encode information into our long-term memory and keep it there? So mnemonic devices were a proposed solution to this, and they've been proven to work. So there's 2 people and groups kind of put forward these ideas of components for memory improvement. They did a lot of research. One of them was Joel R. Levin. He's a professor of educational psychology. And he put together what he calls the 3 R components. And so the first is recoding and then relating, retrieving, and those are his 3. So recoding is basically just coming up with a new way to look at something. So if you have a Spanish vocabulary word and it looks like a word in English that you know, look at it that way, there's that one, now it's in your head. Then you also have relating, which is associating the information with previously gained information. And so getting those 2 things together, again, kind of the same concept, connecting those 2 so that you have something to pull on. And then retrieving, which is finding an efficient way to be able to access that information later. Like if I'm sitting down for a Greek test and I'm studying, and I see this word and I'm like, okay, it kind of looks like this, which reminds me of this, then comes to this, and that's how I remember it, that's not going to work. That is way too far of an art for me to actually remember at the test when I'm stressing about it. So retrieving is finding an efficient way that's going to get you to that information when you need to recall it on the spot. But something that he pushed so much, this was an interview that I read that he did with someone after all of his research and teaching. You've got to have a reason that you want this in your head. If you don't have a reason to memorize it, even if it's not to fail a test, it's not going to be in there. You're not going to care. In one ear, out the other.
all of that. All of your teachers will tell you if you don't care about the information, you're not going to remember it. So that kind of leads into this next guy. I'm going to butcher his name, but Shimamura also did a lot of research into this, and he came up with 4 principles of memory improvement using an acronym, MOVA memory. So we have meaningfulness, organization, visualization, and attention. So the first one is meaningfulness. You remember what happens on your birthdays as far back, pretty far back. You remember the day your firstborn came into the world. You remember every day that your children were born. And you remember your wedding day. I don't know a single person who doesn't remember their wedding day. Those have meaning. Those have emotion. They're tied, and that's going to stick in your brain for a long time. Then you have organization. So you have that reason to know this. You have the reason to remember it. Now you've got to organize it in a way that's going to make it simple and easy to access, similar to the retrieving in the 3R components. Then you have visualization, which if you've ever heard of a cognitive map, that kind of falls into that category. So having some mental image in your head that you can connect with something, and the more vivid, the better. And then lastly is attention, which kind of falls into the same category as having a reason to know it. If you're sitting in a class, not really paying attention, you're not going to remember a thing that that teacher said. You have to pay attention in order to have any chance for any of these to work. So that kind of leads into some effective mnemonics kind of across the board from the studies that I read are keywords. And those work best typically with adults. Partially, they have more of a background knowledge to pull from. That was one thing. You have to have a pre-existing knowledge in order for these devices to work. So keywords work best with adults, but they're used very generally across the board. And then a story with vivid imagery. So having that visualization in your head, having something you can picture, imagine, and not just words on a page. Hugely effective. Another thing is, in the studies, it worked better if the instructor came up with the device and then taught it to the students, instead of having the students come up with it themselves. Again, pushed so much, they had to put in time outside of the instructions. In every single test group that they did, they would give the students wide age range. They would give the students this device, they would give them the tools they needed. Every single time, the people who came back and said, man, I worked for 3 hours, I studied this, I got this information, did exponentially better than the people who were like, yeah, I looked at it a few times. True across the board, this is kind of common sense. If you spend time on it, if you study it, you're going to remember it a lot better than if you just really don't care. But that was something that was very much brought out and very much pushed. One man even said, paying attention is an active, conscious strategy that is necessary for a good memory. Again, if your brain's not there, you're not going to remember a thing. So then, I've given you the research. It works, and it's been tested over and over again in education. But how can we apply that to the Bible and our study of the Bible? This is a huge tool that's out there, and if we can use that, that is kind of amazing. So, show of hands again. How many of you, whenever you were little, you were going to Bible class, how many of you had to have a memory verse? Okay. How about when you were in junior high? Did you still have to have a memory verse? Wow. Okay. How about high school? Okay. How about in the adult class? Do you have memory verses in the adult class? Sweet. All right. We still have some. That's awesome. But across the board, almost everyone in this room raised their hands for in the children's classes. You have memory verses, they give you a song, you remember it, you sometimes move around. Awesome, we push them to do that. But as you get up, we phase that out as though it doesn't matter anymore. Don't know why that happened, but it happened. And even today, I'm seeing it less, but a lot of the time, we don't push our kids to memorize scripture. We don't care if they know what the apostles' names were, what the judges' names were. That's just kind of going by the wayside. We need to stop that from happening because it's important. So we have memory verses. If I ask you, what are the books of the New Testament? How many of you start singing the song in your head? That's a lot. There's a song for the Old Testament too that I did not discover until way later than it would have been helpful. A song for the apostles. There's a song for the judges. All of those are mnemonic devices that help kind of bring that in.
We use them when we're little, which is great. Seeing less of that happening, which is not great. And we don't use them when we're adults, which is also not great. So some things I've heard is that they're too young. The kids are too young, we don't need to push them, we don't want them to get tired, the Bible needs to be something that's fun. Yes, the Bible needs to be exciting. But if you have a kid in school, you're not just gonna let them slack off. That's not seen as good for the kid. They have to memorize their multiplication tables, otherwise they're gonna fail. They have to memorize those grammar rules. You tell them to put time into that. Some have to memorize things for speeches in a class. That's a pretty good chunk of text you're having to recall. And if your kid comes, oh yeah, I have a test tomorrow, have you studied for it? Well, no, go study for it. We push them to do that, but if it's the Bible, way too much of the time is your schoolwork done first? Do you have a practice tonight? Stuff like that. Athletics, they spend hours in practices. They spend hours memorizing the playbook. And you push them to work hard past where they're comfortable. We know how to do this. It's not the kid can't handle this. It's not that, because we tell them to do it in different areas. We just don't have them do it with the Bible, which is an issue. So then we have the other one, is that, oh, well, I'm too old, I'm done learning, I've done this my whole life. One of the things that FC pushes quite a bit is be a lifelong learner. You don't get to stop being a lifelong learner when you're 60. That doesn't make sense with the phrase. When you stop training your mind, studies show it starts to deteriorate faster. Why not train it with the Bible? We're not given an end date for Bible study. That doesn't expire. We don't just hit a point, hit an age, and then, okay, I'm done. I don't have to put in any new information. I don't have to keep trying. That's not a thing. And mnemonic techniques have been proven to be effective with all ages. There's research on older, middle, and young adults. There's studies on it, and it's really, really cool if we use it. And I think as Americans, especially, we've lost that. We live in such a blessed society, which is amazing. How many of y'all have multiple Bibles at home? Okay, if there was Bible faculty in there, maybe more. How many of you have a Bible in a different language at your home? That's a lot. We are blessed, and we have that, but we've got to be so, so, so careful to not let that become a crutch. And I don't have to have this on my heart because I have it on my coffee table. It's a blessing, and it's amazing, but we can't let it hold us back. We are called to have the Word of God on our hearts and to be able to teach people. If we're at school and someone asks us why we believe something, if we don't have an answer, that's on us. That's not our preacher's job. That's not our mom's job. That's our job, especially at this point in our life. And we don't know, that's on us. We got to know. So the research proves we are not done learning, regardless of how old we are. And there's tools out there. So why not use them to get ahead spiritually if we're already using them in education? If we don't have the answers to people when they actually get the gumption to ask us about the Bible, what does that make God look like? What does that make the church look like? We're trying to draw them to God. If we don't know what we're talking about, that's a huge, huge, huge problem. Having a working knowledge of the Word of God is pivotal to being the evangelist that we're called to be. And if we're not teaching the lost, what are we doing here? There's no point to us being on this planet. And if there's a way that we can do that more effectively and better, we've got to take it. So there's all of that. Looking forward, I don't have a whole lot of time, but the rest of the semester, I want to research and try to find the best ways to implement this into both children's and especially high school is kind of where I'm going to stay a little bit, but coming up with ideas to work it into adult curriculum and figure out what's going to help. Because I went around and I asked some people, I'm like, hey, if there were songs, would you do them in the adult classes? No, that's weird. Okay, all right, not comfortable with that one. Let's find things we are comfortable with that are still going to have that result. I want to do research into that, but I also want to keep looking into how specifically music as a mnemonic device can be used for that. Because we know the New Testament because we learned the song. We know the apostles because we learned one of the versions of the songs. That's a big deal. We remember, like if I say, Lord, I need a mountain to climb on, the rest of the song is now going through your head. And that gives us, like we can think of that and we remember the whole thing, we have the idea and it's so encouraging. We got to figure out how to tap into that even more. Because mnemonic devices could be a tool to help us know our Bibles and know God just that much more. And that has the potential to make a big difference to a lot of people who don't even know God yet. That's all I have. Thank you so much.
Basic Bible question, Jordan, since you set yourself up for it.
Oh no.
What
Disclaimer!
What are the Psalms?
Oh yeah, they're songs, they're hymns.
They're
And
Hebrew
I should
song-
know more about that because I'm taking a class right now. But
the Hebrew songbook. So they didn't have always a written record to take around with them, but the Psalms are good enough for the people going to Jerusalem up to worship, maybe just maybe they could be used. I don't know. But we are more inhibited as we get older and don't want to sing songs to remember things, and you'll find that. All right, Ruth, question, comment?
Yes, I have a comment. I think that it's really interesting that you talk about mnemonics, especially like since every time we read our Bible, we come across a new perspective, or we get a deeper understanding of something that that may be new to us, even though we've read it a million times before. And I think that I really appreciate that you talk about mnemonics as a tool for us to be able to like read our Bibles and to be able to understand God better. And I think that we should all be able to like add mnemonics to our Bible studies to help us remember. Thanks for that.
So you've got one. Okay. Micah?
I had a question, sort of a two-parter. So do you think, my first one is, do you think that the reason we sort of phase out mnemonic devices as we get older is because there's sort of a shift in the content of the Bible curriculum, whereas when we're younger, we're more memorizing what's there and getting the words in our heads, trying to memorize, and then as we get older, we sort of transition to more trying to understand what it means and understanding doctrine and what it actually means for us practically. And if you do think that that's the case, do you think there's any way we could implement mnemonic devices, not only just to memorize things, but to help us understand or comprehend, especially biblical doctrine like you were talking?
So to your first question, yes, absolutely. I think that that is how it should work in the old way that education, I mean, still kind of, but definitely in ancient, you learn the facts, and then you learn how to think about it, and then you learn how to tell, to learn the rhetoric and things like that. And I think it kind of works the same way. We learn the facts when we're kids, and then slowly we build up that knowledge until we're to the point where we can go out and tell this knowledge. What I think has happened, part of why I want to push it a little more, is there's so many adults today who don't know their Bible and don't know those facts, but I'm an adult. I don't need to go back to all of that. And so finding a way to push it that's going to make it easier, because no, you don't stop learning, and whenever you read the Bible, there's always something new you draw out, but there's a lot of people out there today who don't know what we would consider the basics, and I think that these could be a help in building up that knowledge. I have thought about the bigger concepts and finding a way to tie that in. I don't know. I would love for that to be a thing, but I also don't want to oversimplify the big overarching concepts of the Bible. What is kind of in my head, now that you've started me on a rant, is there's songs that tell what a book is talking about. And so like the books of the prophets, there's one, Obadiah. I know what Obadiah is about because of a song that I heard when I was 5. So different things like that is kind of what I'm hoping to do, and just something that's an overarching, this is the order of events that things happen in the Bible. In school we learned the 7 C's of the world: creation, corruption, catastrophe, confusion, Christ, cross, consummation. That's pretty much the whole story. So finding ways to implement those so that whenever we are having a study with someone, or even when we're teaching our kids, we can be able to place something, okay, I know this happened here in this journey of Paul, and now either I know exactly what I need to tell them, or I know exactly where to go in the Bible and be efficient with the time that they've decided to give me. I think it's kind of, if that answers.
Jen?
I don't really have anything. I just always appreciate your enthusiasm about stuff, and I just want to say thank you for trying new things and trying to make it interesting and have all of us adults be able to learn new things. So thank you.
one comment and then a question. Great job. I loved your presentation. Very well put. Did you see anything about, like, when it comes to mnemonics, anything with neurology, like how the brain, I know it's like, it's very like, that's a very like broad question, but did you see anything when it comes to like maybe brain chemistry, but also like what they're saying is happening in the brain while you're working on memorization like this?
So that was something that I did not feel like I even had the basic knowledge to be able to understand research if I tried to go there, so I didn't look into that, but that would be really interesting to get into, for sure.
Because it relates to things too in the secular world, like with advertising. When we've had studies on that in this very program, why certain colors work, why certain shapes work, why certain songs work. And that just from a secular perspective, I mean, that we know that. And so we teach kids, like you say, with recitation and with song, so we know that works. So, but Micah's point's well taken. You got that, those are tools, then the application, is there anything to help with the application? Don't know, is the short answer. Is there an absolute song we could sing for the application? Who knows? So, all right, yeah.
I don't really have a question, but I just really appreciate the emphasis you put on like all of this takes effort, and you mentioned that like and I agree that kind of we've lost the value of having God's word in our hearts, but you also emphasized that okay, this takes effort. It requires being intentional about that. And I think you talked about it, that it also takes us rearranging our priorities, like you talked about, you know, people encourage their kids like in school and athletics to push themselves, but that this is the top area where we need to push ourselves. And I think that requires us taking a step back and like rearranging our priorities. But yeah, I just really appreciated the emphasis you put on also just being thankful for the blessing that we have of the Bible, because there are so many people that don't have that in their lives, and we take it for granted so easily. So, yeah.
David?
Just thinking about, like, you were talking about how music is used a lot for these, and I was thinking about, reminds me just, like, when I like to think about how John Williams used the music in Star Wars, and especially with Star Wars, because there's the 9 movies and then more. There's such a large area, and yet he's able to use the exact same idea. I like Leia's theme in particular. He uses the exact same 4 notes, and all it takes is those 4 notes, and you're thinking of the same thing. But then that translates even outside of Star Wars. He uses the same thing for love themes in Indiana Jones and Harry Potter. It's the exact same 4 notes, and it immediately leads you back to the exact same point. And yet this happens without, we don't even think about it. Like, music just makes those connections in our brain, and it's something that I think we really don't take advantage of it nearly as much as we ought to.
Absolutely. When I was in high school, in my Latin class, we were allowed to do research on any topic we wanted and presented it, and a kid in my class did how music affects memory. And in that class, we just randomly would listen to Barbara Ann, and he said if you've ever heard it on the radio outside of class, our brains immediately jumped to thinking of, oh, I'm sitting in Latin class, this is when I'm hearing that song. Because hearing those things do tie us to those emotions and to those memories, and it was really, really cool study.
Of course, I think John Williams, Jaws, Sharks.
Oh, yeah.
Just a couple notes. Here?
So you said that it's better when a mnemonic is given to us, and I would assume that if I made it myself, like if I saw through the process of its creation and then using it myself, I would assume that that would help me memorize it more easily. So do you know why?
That honestly threw me as well, because I was expecting the same thing, and short answer is I haven't done enough research to know, but that was something that I'm like, oh, that's a little different. I mean, I trust them, they did the research and a lot of different things, but that is something I wanted to look into.
I was going to ask a very similar question to Eric, because just from my own experience, like that example you gave of the really long arc to get to the final point, that is exactly how I study a lot of times, and it works sometimes for me, but it's that for me that if I think through it and I make all these connections, then I'm able to remember them, and so I was also surprised by that point that it's not necessarily you have to make the connections, but even someone kind of pointing you toward a connection can still have the same result. So yeah.
I just had a comment. I liked how at the end you kind of tied your whole point about pneumatics back into the purposes that we were created for in the Bible. Like how you mentioned, like in evangelism, like if we don't know the real answers from the scriptures, like how are we supposed to help them? And I thought of 1 Peter 3:15 where it talks about being able to give a defense. And I just think that was really cool that you were able to tie it back into a bigger purpose in life.
Ms. Brown?
I really liked your point early on about how you have to have a reason to want to remember. And at least for me, like reading my Bible every day can easily become just something I'm trying to check off my list. So I think applying that point to our spiritual lives, like we have to have a reason to want to read the Bible, to study the Bible. And I think it's probably different for every person, you know, whether you want to be more comfortable with evangelizing or just like strengthening your own faith. So I just thought that was a really cool thing.
Yeah, the best mechanism won't replace motivation or understanding why. So, do you have anything else? Ladies, Mary, Eric?
Do you think that if we use, like say I use a silly little song to help me memorize a Bible verse, do you think there's any chance that the words might lose depth or meaning, become too fun?
I think that is definitely a possibility. For instance, I've been crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live. We know that and get faster and faster and faster and faster, and that can so easily lose its meaning. And I think that the solution to that, especially as we grow up, because for a kid, you're teaching them to get that in their head. You're teaching them so that there is that, and there's not so much of that bigger understanding quite yet. But as you become an adult, I think the kicker is going to be, you've got to remember why you're doing it. And if you're doing it just to memorize the verse, then yeah, it's just going to become a fun song, whatever. But if you're doing it to internalize the Word of God, then I think having that focus is going to be the answer to that. But that's definitely something to look out for.
That's a good point. David?
Just thought it was really, there's a spiritual application in the fact that we remember what we value, and that we have to organize that somehow in an orderly fashion. It suggests how we're created and in whose image we're created. So.
Anything else? You good? How about from the audience? Any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Great job, Jordan. Thank you so much for tying your research to something that is of practical value to all of us in the room, and enjoyed all the speakers this evening. I wondered, a couple things I wanted to compliment you on promoting a device that Bible writers also use. You probably are familiar with a number of the Psalms are acrostics, where they were deliberately arranged by the Hebrew writers according to their alphabet for memory purposes and ease of transfer from one generation to another. Proverbs 31 is also an acrostic, and then you have these chiastic structures everywhere that they're not necessarily mnemonic, but they're designed by the patterning of them to aid memory. So you're doing something that inspired writers did, and promoting that, so that must be a good tool to use. And then I also wanted to make the comment too that the whole value of incorporating and internalizing this is sort of the Word of God is at the ready. So we are able to, one of the key goals here is like the transference of that to the people that we teach and interact with, so that God's Word spreads. So thank you so much for that reminder of the importance of that. I also wanted to ask you if the memorization, how much context comes into play. Because I know as a little kid, we had random, the odd verse here and there that we would memorize, sometimes the greatest hits of the Bible, or sound bites. That later on, larger patches of memory, whole epistles and psalms, I've tried to make the goal to learn, memorize whole passages the way, so that I'm not just picking the verses that mean something to me personally, or that I think I need, but I'm memorizing things in their context, because you never know how the Holy Spirit can use that. So I'm just wondering if in your research, there was an emphasis anywhere you can, even secular means, on what the context was of that these are isolated facts pulled out.
Absolutely. So I did see some stuff on that very specifically. The schemata that I talked about a little bit at the beginning, a lot of that is just the structure in which we remember things. And so having something to build on, having, I guess, places to put the information. When I said SOHCAHTOA, I haven't had a reason to remember that since I was in 10th grade. I had to look it up. I couldn't remember what the letters were. But someone who's in math, that's within their context. They're going to know what that means. Whereas me over here, I haven't picked up a math textbook in a couple of years. I don't really care. So I think that context absolutely has a role in that, and the research proves that context does have a role in that. Something that I am hoping to look into more is how to utilize that, because there will be some things, like Paul's journeys are so all over the place, but if you have a way, like, okay, here's where I went, here's where I went, here's where I went. I'm not trying to remember something from the Old Testament, I'm remembering Paul's journeys, and so if there's a way to connect that to something I already know about Paul, that has been proven to be effective.
Ms. Bailey?
Did you look into memory palace method when you were studying?
Not when I was studying, but I'm vaguely familiar. Yes, ma'am.
It sounds like you would be really interested in memory palace method, because it can do exactly what you were just describing, like wanting to remember a lot of details all in a row in a particular organized fashion. The memory palace method is very applicable. So I wanted to suggest that too, because I have heard it used in evangelistic tool setting to teach people to memorize massive amounts of information in a particular order in a relatively short amount of time. So, and the more you use the method, the more effective the method. So that's how the memory palace works.
Thank you.
And then SOHCAHTOA, I teach that, yeah. You're gonna hear it later.
Anything else? Thank you very much.
Well, sure appreciate your time tonight. Appreciate our presenters, Todd, Jordan, and Jenna. All tied to different disciplines, different things with your topics. Appreciate it very much. And a panel. We didn't put them on the spot too hard tonight, right? I really appreciate your time reading the papers, and appreciate, again, all of you being here tonight. This is the first, again, of 4 honors evenings this semester. The next will be next month, and that will be advertised ahead of time. And so until that time, we hope you all do very well with your studies here in front, that you enjoy lecture week next week, and that we all have a good week to come. Again, thank you very much, and we'll stand dismissed.